This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the best way to make an amazing website. We have finally tested all 4 graphics options on the brand new MacBook Pros, and today we have some new findings for you guys as we go over the performance of these machines in terms of benchmarks, different tests, real life tests like photo editing, video editing, and also as far as thermals and fan noise. And I did find some new surprises that will help you guys out, those of you guys that have not yet bought one, or if you just want to know the general knowledge and how to suggest the right model to some of your friends and family. So right here I have 3 16-inch machines and along with a 14-inch. The 14-inch is the base model that has a 14-core graphics M1 Pro chip in it, and then the rest of them are 16 with 16 core graphics, 24 core graphics, and 32. Now a few times throughout this video I will be referencing 14-inch machines that do have more performance in terms of graphics. There'll be some interesting results, but in general, these are the graphics options that Apple offers us. Now, let's start out by talking about the CPU performance. And all of these 16-inch MacBooks have the 10-core CPUs, meaning they have 8 performance cores and then 2 efficiency cores, but the 14-inch base model does come with an 8-core CPU, has 6 performance cores and the same 2 efficiency cores. So when we take a look at things such as Geekbench 5 multi-core score, we do see a difference of about 30% or so in favor of the 16-inch machines. Now, when I reference some other 14-inch models that have higher performance CPUs, those have the same performance, but we do run into some thermal issues. Now, as far as single core performance, it's identical across the board. So a lot of tasks where it's really GPU focused, the CPUs shouldn't be limiting them or simple tasks. Now, along with that, if we look at things like photo editing, for example, Lightroom, which is gonna max out all of the cores, we see that all of the 16 inches, even the base model, that's $2,500, the performance is basically the same. And for the 14-inch one that has the 8-core CPU, it's not that far off from it. So if you're doing photo editing tasks, it's not that big of an improvement going to something like a 24-core option. In fact, there's very little difference there. Now, if you're somebody that uses, say, Affinity Photo, which is a lot more optimized to use graphics, here we start seeing a bigger difference, but there is one thing that really surprised me, and that is the fact that the CPU performance is identical across the board, even with the bint 14-inch model. And this is using their built-in benchmark that looks at a wide variety of different tasks in the program. So this just shows that this program, Affinity, which is very well optimized, is relying a lot more on graphics power. So when we take a look at the graphics performance, another thing we see is that the difference between the 14 core and the 16 core is very little, but it is there. Not enough for me to say that you should upgrade to, say, if you're getting the 14-inch to the one that is unbinned. But even more so, this is what really shocked me, is the fact that with the M1 Max, the 24 core performs almost identical to the 32 core. The difference there is what, about 1,000 points or so? That is gonna be not even noticeable when you are doing any kind of photo editing task. So for those of you guys out there that are wondering which one you should get, I would definitely say go for the 24 core model if you need the extra graphics power. Now, there's a couple other reasons why you should go for the 24 core model. For example, battery life. We'll talk about that in just a bit. Now, if we take a look at something from Adobe, like Adobe Super Resolution, that's gonna give you a lot more megapixels, better detail, we see this once again with basically the same 18 seconds to enhance this 42 megapixel RAW file. So the extra cores on the 32 core aren't really doing much here. Now, as far as the M1 Pro chips, the 14 versus 16 core, we have a couple second difference, but once again, would I spend the extra $300 going up, or maybe even $500 going from 14 to 16 if you want that base one for $2,000? No, I wouldn't. I would rather wait the 2 seconds when you're doing this. So for those of you guys who are doing tasks that are mostly CPU focused with some GPU power, you really don't need the 24 or the 32 core chip. In this comparison, the 14 versus 16 versus 24 versus 32, we want to focus on tasks that really need that graphics performance. and that is what we are gonna jump into. But first, I wanna give a shout out to the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. If you've been thinking about making your own website, Squarespace is seriously the best way to go. You can make a great looking website like we did with literally no web making experience. You just choose from one of their great templates, customize blocks of text and images, and easily move them around. It's incredibly simple, it is affordable, and ours have been running flawlessly for years now and bringing in tons of traffic thanks to its built-in SEO tools. Start your free 2-week trial with no credit card required by going to squarespace.com/maxtech or by using that custom link down below. And when you are ready to launch, you will save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. I want to get started with Geekbench 5's metal test. Now this test is not perfect. Some of these graphics chips, they don't, or pretty much all of these, they don't scale fast enough. Apple wants to save battery life, but still gives us a reference point because we're looking at all Apple chips. Now, starting off with a 14 core, we have a score of 35,000, then we go up to 41,000 with a 16 core, so a noticeable difference, up to 59,000 for the 24 core, and 68,000 for the M1 Max. Now you might say, that looks like the scaling is pretty good, but the thing is, if we go ahead and break that down to score or performance per core, you could see that our 14 core gets 2,530 points per graphics core or graphics chip, and then our M1 Max with 32 cores gets 2,122, much less. And you guys can see that in the middle. Now this just shows that the 32 core option, it doesn't have proper scaling. And if we went off of that 14 core base model, the score for 32 cores should be about 80,960. Or if we just go off of the 24 core M1 Max, it would be 79,127. So that one is showing the least amount of performance per core, and that is because of wattage limiting, possibly thermal throttling, and we'll be talking about that here in just a sec. The next test is GFX Bench, and I ran Aztec Ruins 1440p off screen to make sure there's no influence based on the screen resolution or ProMotion. And here we see a nice, fairly linear performance difference. So for gaming, the 32 core does actually show a pretty good improvement over the 24, and the 16 core, not that much. I don't think it's really worth it over the 14 core. And we can also break that down to FPS per graphics core, and here it actually looks pretty dang good. All of them are fairly similar. The 32 core slightly less, but it's still worth it if you want to game on one of these machines. Now, of course, gaming is an issue. There's only a handful of games that run natively to both metal being optimized and also on ARM for Apple Silicon. Now, I also tested the maximum wattage or the peak amount of power that is used to give you this performance. And on the highest end model, we have 43.65, but in the 24 core, we have 38.77, meaning it actually draws more power per core than the 32, which is why performance on some of these other tests, it's actually not that big of a difference. Next, let's talk about Blender for 3D rendering. I used the brand new alpha release, which is the first one that supports metal. Now, it got a lot faster compared to the previous version. It will still keep getting improved, but looking at the numbers, I see a couple of things. Let's start out with the BMW scene here, and the 14 core is quite a bit slower than the 16 core here. And then the 24 versus 32 core M1 Max, the difference is literally just a few seconds, very little difference. Now, the classroom scene takes longer. It's a lot tougher of a test here. And for some reason, the 14 core compared to the 16 core, the difference was very, very small. I'm not sure why. I retested it. That is what I saw. And then the difference between the 24 and 32, also not that big of a difference. I don't know if it is worth spending the extra money unless you just want to buy one off the shelf. But it is clear that going from 16 to 24 is a massive jump. Could also be because of memory, but that jump right there is almost twice the performance going from 16 to 24. So really, really good scaling. Now let's get into video editing. Starting off with H.264, this is a 5-minute 4K project. Here, almost no difference comparing the 14 core and the 16 core, and pretty much no difference 24 versus 32. Now that is because this project, even though I do have a couple LUTs applied, I have film grain applied, it is really limited by the encoders, and the M1 Max chip has dual encoders compared to the M1 Pro, and even though we don't see double the performance, it is close. We're getting quite a bit faster performance here. So you definitely need to have at least a 24 if you want to have really fast exports. And this is the stuff that most people work with the amount of effects that most people add. So very great performance. Now, if we go to H.265, this is the new modern codec that gives you smaller file sizes and better quality. Here we see an even bigger difference, and we have actually more than twice the speed of export for the M1 Max chips, but basically the same thing where it doesn't matter if you go for a lower core count, you just have to have the M1 Max instead of the Pro, and the performance is great. Now, when we test something out that is not limited by the encoders and it's not limited by CPU performance, it's raw graphics, we do see a different story. This is in DaVinci Resolve, and it is denoising 4K footage, and this is both using temporal and spatial cranked up, so it's very, very tough on the graphics. And going from a 14 core to a 16 gives us just 1 more frame per second. Not a very big difference. And then jumping up to the 24, we jump by 3. And then once again, we jump by 2 going up to the 32. So not perfect scaling there, but if you're somebody that does very heavy effects that's only based on the graphics, that 32 core is worth it. But that's if it is only using the graphics performance. So we'll talk about thermals here. So if we go ahead and take a look at something like ProRES RAW, which these laptops here are the best for working with ProRES or ProRES RAW. We do see a speed improvement with the M1 Max chip over the Pros, but it is not as significant as I expected, because when you're working with this footage, it also really pushes the CPU, and because of that, we're not getting double the speed, only roughly 50% faster or so. And once again, it doesn't matter if you have a lower core count or higher, you just want to get the M1 Max chip. Now, jumping up a notch to 8K ProRES RAW, this is a tougher project. We don't get twice the performance with the M1 Max, but we get close to it. And once again here, you guys see that the 24 core is just as fast as the 32 core. So when you have something that is very heavy graphics related, it's maxing out the graphics here, but it also requires CPU performance. That's when thermals come in, and that is where the 32 core really gives you no benefit. But wait until you see this. This 8K Canon RAW project going out to 4K HEVC, which is what a lot of people do for the internet, our 24 core is actually faster than the 32 core, taking 7 minutes and 10 seconds compared to 7:35. Now, how can that be? How can the cheaper one be faster and actually ran cooler as well? Well, because that graphics chip in there, it takes a lot of power, and this also maxes out the CPU. That takes a lot of power. Because of that, it runs so hot that it actually slows down the CPU from 1300 to about 1000 megahertz. So it throttles the graphics, and not only does it run super hot and loud, but it also does it slower. It is crazy. And then if we take a look at the difference between the 14 core and 32 core, we do see a difference of about 1.5 minutes getting close to there. So that scaling is actually pretty good, because also the CPU is being a limitation there. I don't really think it's the graphics. So there you guys go. You see that a 24 core can actually beat out a 32 core model. Now, what is even more interesting than that to me is that when we take a look at the base 16-inch MacBook Pro, the one that's kept in stock most of the time, $2,500, it actually matched the 14-inch model that has a 32 core M1 Max with 64 gigs of RAM. I spent $4,100 for this Mac, and a $2,500 one that's half the graphics cores and a quarter of the RAM had the same exact 10-minute export time. And that just shows you how much these 14-inch MacBooks can throttle. And not only that, this is when we can talk about fan noise as well, because the 16-inch one that took just the same time, 10 minutes, it ran quieter as well, quite a bit quieter. Now, in general, if you're looking at these machines, if you want a silent machine, even if you're pushing it, you want to get either the base model 14-inch or the base model 16-inch. When you start giving it a lot more graphics power, you start pushing it, they will spin up. Now, they're not crazy loud, they're better than Windows machines, but the base models of both 14 and 16 are very quiet. But what's crazy is, you guys saw the result, the $2,500 base 16-inch beat out the 14-inch spec'd out. When it does that, it actually runs the fans at about 30%. It's almost silent, even when the CPU and the GPU is maxed out. Whereas, even if you get the base model 14-inch, $2,000 one, $1,999, that one will spin up the fans 100%, even with the 14-core graphics and the 8-core processor instead of the 10-core, it will max out the fans and be loud if you're pushing the system to its max. Whereas that 16-inch model, it has a lot better thermal performance, a lot better cooling, and it stays pretty much silent even under full load. So if you care about quietness, running cool, that is the machine that you want to get. And then for those of you guys that want to get the max, the 24-core runs about the same as the 32, slightly less thermals, but because it's using more wattage for the amount of cores, you get better bang for the buck, but it still can spin up the fans and get loud. And now let's go ahead and finish off with battery life. I ran a 45-minute test using GFX Bench, running all of their tests in a loop, and this really pushes the graphics. It simulates doing very heavy work, starting out with 100% battery life, and after the 45 minutes, our 14-inch base model had 75% battery life remaining. And the 16-inch model, that one had 80% remaining, even though it has more graphics performance, just because of the bigger battery. Now, jumping up to the 24-core M1 Max, that one had 70% remaining, so you actually don't take that big of a hit in terms of battery life, and the 32 had 64. So you guys see that scaling of battery. So technically, if you buy the full maxed out version and you're really pushing it, you might be getting about 2 hours of battery life, maybe roughly around there. But with the base model, you'll get a lot more. And then for those of you guys that are curious about the 14-inch models, here you guys go. If you get the maxed out, you only have 52% remaining, which means it's only gonna last you roughly an hour and a half or so if you're really pushing the machine. So what did we learn from all of this testing? Well, you definitely get diminishing returns getting extra graphics cores. From 14 to 16, in most cases it's not worth it unless you need the CPU performance. And for most video editing tasks, you won't really see that. Same thing goes from the 24 to 32 core. You're not gonna get that much better performance unless you're gaming, which not very many people are, or you're doing something like noise reduction, and still the difference isn't that big. But it's gonna run hotter, the battery life is definitely worse on the 32 core, and if you're really pushing the machine, it could actually perform worse than the cheaper 24-core model. So the 24-core with the M1 Max is the bang for the buck. It is the sweet spot. It is really, really well optimized for that chassis. And if you want to save a little money, get the base one. That one runs really cool and really quiet, and it has insane battery life, only dropping 20% after 45 minutes of heavy use. So my suggestion, if you can get a 16-inch, you can deal with it, go for it. Better battery life, you get great performance, and it literally, the 16-inch $2,500 one had the same performance as a spec'd out 14-inch, which is just, it's crazy. So there you guys go, the full comparison between all of the graphics options that you can get. Let me know your thoughts down below. Click that circle above if you guys want to subscribe and help us reach our goal of 1 million subscribers. Check out one of those great videos right over there. This has been Max, and I will see you in the next video.